Forget the fairy tales. The real Middle Ages weren't about chivalry or romance, and they were about control. Behind castle walls and candlelit chapels, the church dictated when you could love, how you could touch, and whether you'd burn in hell for it. These weren't just rules, they were obsessions, carved into calendars and whispered in confessions. Today, we're uncovering 5 of the creepiest, strangest, and most disturbing beliefs about love and sex in medieval Europe. By the end, you'll thank every god imaginable that you were born in the 21st century. Imagine planning a romantic night with your spouse, only to realize the church had already decided you weren't allowed to touch each other. In medieval Europe, intimacy wasn't ruled by passion or affection, but by the calendar. The church's grip on daily life was absolute. Every kiss, every embrace, every act of love had to obey its timetable. Sundays were automatically forbidden, a holy day reserved for God alone. Thursdays and Fridays, off limits too, marked as days of preparation for communion. And if that wasn't enough, entire seasons vanished from the realm of love. Lent, Advent, Pentecost, each one stretching for weeks, sometimes months, during which even married couples were commanded to live in abstinence. When all the restrictions were tallied, couples realized something chilling. Nearly half the year was off limits. Half a year of restraint, half a year of guilt. Now picture newlyweds finally together after a long-awaited marriage, only to learn their union had to obey a holy schedule. Breaking the rules wasn't just a sin, it was believed to endanger your soul itself. A single mistake on the wrong day, and eternal damnation was said to await. It's almost impossible to imagine today. Love dictated by liturgy, intimacy policed by priests. But that was the medieval world, a place where even the most private act was shadowed by fear and judgment. And yet behind this control lay a deeper purpose. These rules weren't simply about holiness. They were about power. By deciding when couples could come together, the church extended its authority into the most intimate corners of human life. It wasn't enough to rule the kingdom. The church sought to rule the body, too. So next time you see a medieval romance painting, remember, beneath the silks and candles was a world where love itself had to bow to the calendar. This next one might sound completely insane to modern ears. Of course, the church condemned bestiality as one of the gravest sins imaginable. No surprise there. But what is shocking is how the punishment changed depending on one single detail, whether you were married or not. If an unmarried man confessed to this act, the church's penitentials, those handbooks priests used to assign punishments, prescribed roughly 40 days of fasting, prayer, and repentance. Harsh, yes, but survivable. But if the same sin was committed by a married man, the sentence exploded into 10 years of penance, 10 years of fasting on specific days, 10 years of isolation, restrictions, public shame, and repeated confession. A decade of spiritual exile. The reasoning behind this bizarre logic was chilling. The church taught that a married man already had a lawful outlet for his desires, his wife. Therefore, he was more guilty because he had chosen corruption despite having a holy alternative. A single man, on the other hand, had no spouse to control his lust, so his sin was treated with more pity than outrage. In other words, marriage, and supposedly sacred and loving, was viewed less as a union of hearts and more as a tool of discipline. A leash, not a bond. This twisted double standard reveals something far bigger than one strange rule. It shows how the medieval church saw sexuality not as human or emotional, but as something that needed constant control. Sin wasn't just a matter of right and wrong. It was a hierarchy. Your social role, your marital status, even your gender could decide the weight of your guilt. Behind the rituals and confessions, the church wasn't simply guiding people toward purity. It was enforcing obedience. And nowhere was that control more personal, more suffocating than in the marriage bed itself. Today, pregnancy is often seen as a time of closeness, a period when couples share tenderness, excitement, and deep emotional connection. But in the Middle Ages, that same moment of life and love was turned into something forbidden. According to the church, intimacy during pregnancy was not only unnecessary, it was sinful. The reasoning was painfully simple. The only purpose of intimacy was to create children. And if a woman was already pregnant, that purpose had been fulfilled. Anything beyond that, pure indulgence. So once conception occurred, affection was cut off. Husbands were told to keep their distance. Wives were treated as if their bodies had become sacred, and therefore untouchable. But the church's control didn't stop at doctrine. Fear was its greatest weapon. Religious leaders spread disturbing myths warning that intimacy during pregnancy could cause miscarriages, deformities, or even invite evil spirits into the unborn child. These were not fringe beliefs. They were accepted truths in a world ruled by superstition and silence. Imagine being a woman in that time, pregnant, vulnerable and isolated, told that your husband's touch could endanger your baby's soul. Instead of comfort, there was distance. Instead of closeness, there was guilt. A time that should have been filled with affection became a season of loneliness. For the husband, love became an act of restraint. For the wife, motherhood became a cage of purity, all because the church saw the human body not as a source of connection, but as a battlefield between spirit and sin. Today, we know better. Medicine tells us that intimacy during pregnancy is safe, even beneficial for most couples. But in medieval Europe, fear replaced science, and control replaced compassion. And behind it all was the same relentless message. Desire must be punished, even when it comes from love. When we picture Catholic priests today, celibacy feels like an unshakable rule, an ancient vow tied to faith itself. But here's the shocking truth. For the first 1,000 years of Christianity, priests were allowed to marry, have families, and live ordinary lives. That all changed in the 12th century. At the First and Second Lateran Council, in 1123 and 1139, the Church dropped a bombshell. Priests could no longer marry. From that moment, centuries of tradition were erased, but why? The official reason sounded noble: spiritual discipline. Priests were told they had to dedicate themselves entirely to God, free from the distractions of family life. Yet behind the sermons and scripture lay a far more practical motive: power and money. You see, before celibacy became mandatory, priests who married often passed down land, homes, and wealth to their children, just like any other man. To church leaders, that was a problem. Every inheritance that went to a priest's family was wealth that didn't return to the church. So by outlawing marriage, the church ensured that every priest's possessions, every acre of land, and every coin of gold stayed under its control. It was a brilliant and ruthless move. Celibacy became a spiritual ideal, but also a financial strategy. Over time, it reshaped the priesthood itself, creating an image of the priest as a pure, detached servant of God, untethered to earthly bonds. But for many men, this vow became a silent torment. Cut off from love, from partnership, from family, countless priests lived in loneliness, fighting desires they could never admit. Some historians say, broke the rule in secret, taking lovers, fathering children, hiding their double lives behind church walls. By the 13th century, the rule had hardened into dogma, reinforced again at the Council of Trent in the 1500s. Celibacy became not just a rule, it became identity, a vow born of faith and politics that would define the church for centuries to come, and leave behind a trail of secrecy and scandal that still echoes today. If there's one belief that truly captures the strangeness and the cruelty of medieval thought, it's this: pleasure itself was considered sinful. To theologians like Thomas Aquinas, intimacy was only justified when it created life. Anything beyond that, any act done purely for enjoyment, and was seen as corruption. A husband seeking pleasure with his wife wasn't showing love. He was, according to church teaching, treating her like a prostitute. And this wasn't a fringe opinion whispered in dark corners. It was mainstream doctrine. Centuries earlier, St. Jerome even claimed that a man too passionately in love with his wife was no better than an adulterer. To them, passion, even within marriage, was dangerous. Lust wasn't a spark of love. It was the devil's whisper. The result was devastating. Marriage, one of humanity's oldest and most intimate bonds, was stripped of warmth. Husbands and wives were told to live with restraint, to avoid affection, to perform their duties mechanically, and feel shame for enjoying them. Desire was not something to be understood. It was something to be crushed. Romance was suspicious. Love was tolerated, but passion was condemned. Imagine living in a world where even loving your spouse too much could be seen as a path to damnation. Where every heartbeat of attraction had to be silenced. Every moment of joy in your partner's touch had to be repented for. That was the medieval mindset, a war between body and soul, where the church demanded victory over both. It's hard for modern minds to grasp how deeply this shaped people's lives. These teachings didn't just influence the confessional, they sculpted culture, art, and marriage itself for generations. Love was rewritten into obedience. Pleasure was rewritten into sin. So when we think of the Middle Ages, knights, castles, and candlelit halls, we should remember what truly ruled that world. Fear. Fear of desire. Fear of love. Fear of being human. When we think of the Middle Ages, our minds often jump to knights, castles, and grand battles, tales of courage and glory. But the real story of that era wasn't written in war or triumph. It was written in rules. Rules that reached into kitchens, bedrooms, and hearts, controlling even the most private corners of life. The church's influence went far beyond faith. It shaped how people loved, how they married, even how they thought about their own bodies. From the endless list of forbidden days, to punishments that made married men guiltier than bachelors, to the fear of touching a pregnant wife, to priests stripped of family and affection, to the haunting belief that pleasure itself was a sin. Each rule, each restriction served one purpose: obedience. By turning love into guilt and passion into shame, the church maintained power not just over kingdoms, but over souls. Because the easiest way to control a person isn't through armies or swords, it's through their sense of sin. For ordinary men and women, life in the Middle Ages wasn't just about surviving famine or war. It was about surviving judgment. Every day, every thought, every touch. The greatest prison wasn't made of stone. It was built from fear. And yet, even within that world, love still found a way. In secret glances, in whispered words, in stolen nights when the rules were forgotten and two people dared to be human again. Because no law, no sermon, no council decree could ever fully silence the most natural force of all, the need to love and be loved. So when you hear stories of medieval romance or chivalry, remember the truth behind the candlelight. It wasn't a time of purity or perfection. It was a time when power disguised itself as piety, and when desire itself was treated like rebellion. Which of these medieval beliefs shocked you the most? Was it the celibate priests, the strange punishments, or the idea that love itself could damn your soul? Tell me in the comments below, and if you enjoy uncovering the hidden, eerie sides of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because sometimes the darkest tales aren't about war or kings, but about what happened behind closed doors.